Hello, TrainerRoad crew, and thank you so much for answering my question about training for the Pisgah stage race in episode 281. Our pleasure, Rose. She says, since then, I've purchased a smart trainer and have started structured training with TrainerRoad. And in just the last couple months, I've increased my FTP by 34 watts. Way to go. Nice. She says, also, I've been able to be more consistent with training, even right now during these winter months of bad trail conditions. And we currently have a terrible freeze-thaw cycle and process, making our trails unrideable. Yeah, if she's in North Carolina, that would be sketchy because there's a lot of rocks. And if your rocks are freezing and thawing, that would be, that's terrifying. I did my first mountain bike race in November, and one of the biggest sources of discomfort among many things were my hands cramping and becoming fatigued from long descents. For my training, I'm trying to incorporate more race simulations type rides that she says in quotes, where I take fewer rest stops to try to build this type of strength. But usually on a long descent, we stop multiple times to regroup and make sure everyone made it through the technical section safely. During a recent episode, Amber mentioned doing grip strength exercises. I was wondering if Amber could share how she's working on this or any other tips on how to endure these long descents. Thanks so much for everything that you do. So Amber's not with us today, but we're going to go into a lot of this. And I know that she agrees that this is the way that we would want to cover it. So she's in support of this for sure. So something to, I guess, add to this one, I guess right off the top, Chad, you might want to jump in on this, but a lot of the time it's misattribution happens, in particular with fatigue and any sort of limitation in this sort of scenario, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't think, my opinion is that strength isn't the limiter here, but I'm going to answer the question as though it were. So let's move forward thinking that you do need to work on your grip strength. And my first recommendation would be, if strength training isn't already a part of your routine, make it part of your routine. And in doing so, you really don't have to give much attention to improving your grip strength if you are engaging in what I term proper strength training. And I'm not trying to make fun of machines. I understand they have relevance in certain situations. They do, but they don't do anything for your grip. You need to pick up heavy stuff, and you need to do it with hands that are capable of holding on to those things. So simply moving through a properly constructed strength training routine 2, even 3 times a week, whatever it may be, and lifting and moving heavy things will take care of your grip strength. I mean, especially as it relates to hanging onto mountain bike bars, which, the other fellows are going to get to this later. I think you have different issues here, but if anything, this is more of a strength endurance issue. And you just, like I said, regular strength training, voila, it's going to take care of it. On top of that, if you do still feel like this is a limiter and you need to improve how firmly you can grip whatever, there are tools that work actually quite well. There are these fat grips. They're spelled with a Z, and you can put them on anything, a barbell, dumbbells, whatever, and they just make the grip wider. I use them because I do even those renegade push-ups we've described before, where you're on your hands. That's a lot of weight to put on a narrow tube. And it has given me some pretty sore palms in the past. So I use those for things like that. I also use, a lot of people do what are termed chubby bars. If you're a Rogue fan, Rogue equipment, they call them axles, and they have a stubby axle and a wide axle, but they're really thick bars. They're hard to hang on to. You do a set of deadlifts with a regular bar. Grip's probably not a limiter for most of us working with bike guy strength. You grab a stubby bar and try to hang on to that for a set. And by the end of it, your forearms are about as fatigued as, your posterior chain. And then they also have a thing called a wrist roller. And there's one that you can actually peg to a rack. And then the other simpler version of it, you just hold up and you just roll a weight, whether it's a kettlebell, a dumbbell, whatever, just something heavy. And you just roll your hands like you're throttling a motorcycle accelerator. And then you just roll it back down. So those specifically target the grip if you feel that the grip is the issue. And then anecdotally, I have noticed that hanging onto mountain bike handlebars are too narrow for my hand size. It just doesn't work out. So I finished too many rides with exactly what you're describing here. And all I did was go to fatter grips. In particular, Wolf Tooth makes grips called Fat Paws and Mega Fat Paws. And I bought both of them and found that my sweet spot was the regular size Fat Paws. And I've had no issues since. They're just a little fatter and I don't have to over squeeze the bars. And that's taken care of this very same issue that I was experiencing.
Before we get into the other stuff, I want to talk about 2 other exercises that I find very good for grip strength. One is, and Keegan, you and Sophia do this too, actually, and I think a lot of cyclists are hex bar deadlifts. Is this part of your strength plan?
I'd say that's I mean, as far as like heavy work goes, like squats, deadlifts, hex bar deadlifts, I probably use the hex or trap bar, if you want to call it that, probably 90% of the time, maybe 80%. So I definitely use that more than a regular barbell, and I do more deadlifts and squats. And I think you're right. There's something about the hex bar that like, it's like harder to hold on to because you can't do like the reverse like sumo grip on it, or that's called, I think that's called sumo grip.
It's a neutral grip position, right?
Yeah, it's a neutral grip. So you're just holding on the side. I like it for my back. I think it's a little bit safer. And you can just like focus on the lift itself, and you're not trying to worry about scraping your shins or whatever on it. But yeah, I do think it's really good for your grip strength. And then I see you have the farmer carries as well, which is you kind of walk with it. You can also carry the hex bar around and like walk with it. You load it up with however much weight you can kind of hang on to and just kind of cruise around. And yeah, that's
cruise around,
really helpful.
Yeah. Or you can also pick up dumbbells, and to combine these, you can do the fat grips on dumbbells and try to walk and hold those, and that is extremely hard. But the hex bar or trap bar deadlifts, the thing that I like about these more than regular deadlifts for cyclists are that so regular deadlifts are more your posterior chain, so like you'll feel more in your hamstrings, your glutes, your back, which is important. But the hex bar, I feel it myself way more in my quads. And I still get some back, but I also kind of feel it in my my traps too, which is strap bar. I'm not actually doing shrugs, but that is a limiter for me, is like the strength up above my shoulders. I get tired on rides. Usually that's the first thing that gets tired, and this has helped me get a little stronger in that. So I've switched my routine from deadlifts to the hex bar deadlifts completely, and I've really liked it. Chad?
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because the beauty of a deadlift is it can be tweaked in so many ways to target so many different things. I kind of take issue with hex bar deadlifts because they call themselves deadlifts, and they're more akin to a squat when you consider that they're more quad intensive. They don't do a heck of a lot for the posterior chain. If you think of the amount of hinging that takes place when you are basically pulling from or behind the knees, that's all quad, which for a quad exercise, I think it's a very good one. It's definitely very safe for the back. But if you even load a squat bar in a low back position, you're getting more hinging and more posterior stress than you get from hex or trap bar deadlifts. So I do like them as an exercise. I do wish they weren't named deadlifts.
Yeah, I feel like the closest thing they're closest to is a front squat.
Yeah,
because that's
agreed.
But front squats take a lot of technique, and they can be extremely hard to get right. Where hex bar, man, it's pretty easy not to mess that up. And to Keegan's point, it's I think a lot easier to be safer as long as you don't like round your back for some reason. To just lock it in and do it. And two, another way to be safe for cyclists, you could do the 10, 15, 20 reps, which I have no science to back this up, but I personally think there's maybe some benefit to that for cycling of doing high rep stuff. But like that is such an anecdote and not bro. Like can we edit this out? Okay.
No, actually don't, because I think anytime you talk about pushing toward those higher rep ranges, just don't even look at it as strength. Look at it as durability. You're trying to create a more durable body, and it does exactly that.
Yeah. And something to add to this too, Nate, you alluded to this, but I just want to kind of cement it is, and Keegan, like what you're saying, the reason that you want to lower risk with your strength training, because that's not priority number one. Like it would be a shame if your cycling was compromised because you were lifting and you didn't have a trap bar, and then you had bad technique on one of the lifts and you ended up like throwing your back out, like that would suck. That would be, he can't go to work because of that. Right. So you can't really afford to do that. So for a lot of us listening, that's why this can also be really helpful. It's not an excuse to have bad technique. You can still have great technique. It's just a different movement. It's substantially different with the bar. So
I have a question for Keegan. What would you say to me if I tell you at the end of my descents, my hands, I can like just peel them off because I was gripping them so hard and my hands hurt?
I'd say you're grabbing the bars too tight. That'd be the biggest thing. And maybe you need to play with your grips as well. Like Chad was mentioning, he likes like the fat pause or mega pause. Like for me, I used to use the ESI Racer's Edge, like the skinniest, smallest, lightest grips. Then I went up just like one size, just to the chunky, and like all my hand pain got better. Just like that little bit bigger diameter, your hands, you have to hang on as tight, you have a little more contact. The other thing I think that's like overlooked a lot is like how close your brakes are to your bar. And if your brakes are like, you're having to reach a long ways with your finger, I think it creates more strain in your forearm. So if you can get more finger wrap around your brake, like instead of grabbing the brake lever, like right your first knuckle, like try and grab it a little more in the center, and you have a little more wrap on it. And I think it creates less tension throughout your whole forearm when you're braking, especially on long descents, when you're grabbing the brakes hard for a long time. That seemed to make a big difference for me. I can't remember who told me that. I learned it quite a few years ago, and it made a big difference in like arm pump and like pain while descending. So
there's
it's a small tip.
Something else to add to that too is if your brakes are the sort of, so we're getting more into like Chad said, his assumption isn't the fact that grip strength is as much the limiter, but we're going to, we kind of approached it from that perspective. Now we're going to get into a lot of the context of what we think, why you're experiencing hand and arm fatigue on the bike. And one of the things, just since you mentioned brakes there too, Keegan, is some brakes will have lever reach adjust, and then that brake will also have brake pad contact adjust. So those two things need to be adjusted appropriately, like because of each other, they need to be related. So like an example of that is you can adjust your lever reach so that it comes really far in, but then you have to think about it. You just have less distance that your lever can travel before it hits the grip. So as a result, if you do run your brakes like that, and you do have the luxury of being able to adjust where your pads make contact or how soon they make contact with the rotor, you're going to want to run them a lot closer to that rotor. So then that way you don't find yourself in the situation of using your brake and then it's that brake lever is hitting your other fingers on the grip or smashing up against the grip, because then you're not going to have braking power. And I promise you that will be much worse than making, having sore hands.
I think also making sure that your brakes are far enough in that, assuming you're braking with one finger, which most you can if you have hydraulic disc brakes, that's like, you don't need more than one finger. So make sure your brakes are far enough in on the bike, on your handlebars, that when you pull them, they're not going to hit any of the other fingers, and that like you only get one finger on there. I think that, and that way you get more leverage on it as well. So it's like if you're grabbing at the very end of the lever, you can get more leverage on the lever, and you're not having to work as hard to pull it. So.
Yeah. To rephrase that, when your index finger should just be at the outer little hook of your lever, that's where it should be. It shouldn't be anywhere inboard from that. So
I got two things. One, pretty embarrassing, but when I first started mountain biking, I was so scared. I literally had 3 fingers on the brakes. Like I was ready just to claw those things down, and they were hydraulic. Yeah, that was probably really dangerous too. I mean, it was really dangerous. But two, what in my experience, Rose, what I find is if I am completely scared, my hands I grip that bar so tight, and my hands hurt after the descent. But if I am not scared and I am comfortable, I've got what John says is he tells me if you got like a paper towel roll, or a toilet paper roll, just the cardboard in the middle, you should be able to hold it like that without crushing it. And I think John in a second is going to talk about this thing called arm pump and enduro, and where you're really pushing around. That's different from XC racing, where I think normally there's not so much need to grip extremely hard. And even so on the same trails, where I was probably stronger before when I first started mountain biking, but I was just so scared I grip it hard. And now that those trails aren't scary to me anymore, I just kind of flow through them, and I think, Rose, that was probably the biggest change for me, is just consciously gripping a little bit less.
I find that I find the same thing, Nate. And when I get scared, I'm usually having, and when I'm nervous, it's because I have bad technique. And that's why the riding experience is scaring me, right? Now, I could just also be riding way over my head on the terrain, and that's one thing. But also in those moments, if I have bad technique, I grip harder. And that's because I'm not in the right position to be able to ride my bike in a balanced way. So then I compensate with trying to grip too hard with my hands and my arms. And then that ends up creating a cascading effect that then makes everything else worse, because then you're gripping too hard with your arms and you can't feel them, and your technique actually gets even worse. And then it's just a downhill slide. I'm sure that some of you listening to this are really familiar with. So for me, I find that if I am not really making sure I have good technique and revisiting that and consciously thinking about it when I'm riding. This doesn't happen when I'm racing, for example. I'm not thinking like consciously technique, but in the times to practice and train, I'm really focused on making sure that I have the right technique, and I think about it a lot. And if I do that, I'm just going to be riding the bike better, and I'm not going to feel like I have to grip as hard. With arm pump, that's something, and you actually mentioned the wrist roller, Chad. The best way for a person to feel what arm pump is to use a wrist roller, right? When you use those and you keep going and it feels like your forearms are about to burst, and you actually lose like a lot of hand strength. Like in your brain, you're gripping as hard as you can, but if you actually feel how hard you're gripping, your hands are hardly able to grip. And I don't know the actual science behind all of it, but the bro science behind this is that it has to do with excess blood flow to the region. And then as a result, your body isn't able to deal with that or operate as efficiently for one reason or another. And I have no clue if that's correct. But it feels absolutely debilitating, and it can be really scary. And in Rose's case, when she's riding back east, Nate, it's so different than what we ride right out here in the West. So it doesn't even have to be a really long descent. If it's chunky and slippery and rooty and rocky, that's a lot tougher. Like your fatigue per foot on the trail is just way higher as a result of that. Keegan, have you ever dealt with that sort of a thing, like the sort of hand fatigue where it's like debilitating in a cross country race?
Man, I wouldn't say like a normal cross country race. I've definitely had that fatigue in like longer marathon style races. But I think since I've incorporated more strength training into my like normal training routine, I feel like that's almost been eliminated, which has been the last few years. So I think that's been the biggest difference for me, is just incorporating like regular strength training in. So I think the technique, like back to what you said, when it gets hard or technical and sometimes you get scared, like I do end up gripping harder for a second, and that's, whether it's good or bad, that's just what happens, you know? And I think having stronger forearms and stronger, like just overall grip strength, I think that helps kind of compensate for that poor technique here and there that just inevitably happens. But yeah, when it happens to me, it's normally like in like super wet, rocky, rooty stuff where like, sure, you want to be relaxed and like try and go with it, but you end up just gripping harder. I think that's something that I'm not super comfortable with, like relatively speaking to some racers that get to do it a lot. I'm not bad at it, but I'm not as proficient as some. So I think for me, that's one area of like I get a little bit stressed out and I end up like over gripping and kind of like overcompensating in other areas. So yeah, I have dealt with it. Just try and like, and when it happens, I notice I'm like, okay, just relax. Like it's fine. You're just riding your bike. Just don't grab as hard. Don't grab the brakes as hard. Just like let it flow.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I can relate.
Did that happen? World champs, wasn't there a lot of like rocky, loose stuff there too? Yeah.
Yeah, those descents were so short though that it was a little different. Like you don't get your time. You don't have enough time on those descents to have your hands to really like load up, I think, because the descents were only, 15 seconds long. So you're just kind of shooting down, and maybe I was over gripping. I probably was, because it was super, super slick. But it's so short that like I didn't relax on the climb. And I think the other thing to think about too is when you're climbing, you can change your hand position around. So like it helps, like you roll your thumbs up on top, you can hang on the edge of the grips, just like move your hands on the grips. And just like, even though you're climbing, it still like takes fatigue off that area of your palm. And you can roll your thumbs around. That helps like change your wrist position. It helps with everything. So I think just doing that, even if it's for like 2 minutes on the climb and then you have to reset for the descent, it just gives your thumbs and everything a few minutes to relax and kind of chill out before you death grip your way down the next descent. So,
yeah. One thing too that I've found that's helped is going away from foam grips that don't have a lot of traction on them, and then switching over to more traditional grips. I use the ODI Elite Pro walk-on grip, I think it's called. And then I also, if grips have things called waffling on them, which looks like a waffle pattern, it's like large kind of squares that are raised and stand off from the grip. Those are for situations where you get mud packed in, like you've landed in the mud and your gloves are just covered in mud, or your grip gets covered in mud. And they're intended to give you traction in those scenarios. And that's why they have the big relief with those squares. But they're actually really bad for giving you like a firm gripping surface or reliable gripping surface. So if you have those things on there and you feel like you're really gripping extra hard, you can take a razor blade and just shave those off carefully. And if you can shave those off of your grip, then your grip doesn't have this disconnection slip plane in between your hand and the actual grip itself. So I found that was an issue. And ever since I switched to those grips, I've been able to relax my hands substantially. So yeah, it's all about testing and figuring it out. But one thing that I really do think with this is, if you are not used to descending and you haven't spent a lot of time in it, you will experience this more regularly if you have spent time doing it. So that's another thing. Like a lot of people will go to some sort of descent that's really long and they're not used to it. And they'll be like, oh, I've got debilitating hand fatigue. Well, you should expect to have something like that if it's something your body is not used to. We talk about this with everything with training. It's stimulus, right? And it's making sure that your body is prepared for what sort of load it's going to face on race day. So that's a really important thing to have. Nate, sorry.
Yeah. There's a question about what what training phase to include strength training in. And excuse me, we're a little bit, so our perspective is this is something to be a healthy individual you should do year round. And especially if you're a master's man or woman, as you get older, this is extremely important. And it's going to have benefits. It's going to have benefits just in how you feel on the bike, but also health benefits in general. And if you want to, a rule of thumb would be in the base phase, if you really want to kind of add weight, that would be the time. And then in build and specialty, just maintain. And you don't need to really, you don't need, that's something I fall in a trap in all the time, is you see your FTP, then you see your hours, then you see how much you're lifting. You're like, I could raise all of these all at the same time. And it does kind of take away from training if you try to really, stack the reps up and the volume. So if you just kind of maintain it, you can still be very strong. I think this is what Keegan's strategy is too. I'd like to hear Keegan. I think Chad just raised his hand too and wants to say something, and probably tell me I'm wrong.
No. I actually want to agree with everything you said. And I just want to emphasize that we commonly say, if you're really going to indulge in weight training, do so in the base training, because base training is typically lower intensity and you can get away with adding this type of work on top of the pile. But we push the whole sweet spot approach to base training, and that's not low intensity. It's pretty taxing. And if you pile weight training on top of it, it can quickly lead to too much of a training load. So when possible, I like people to start this as early as their pre-training phase. So if you're taking an interim stage between last season and next season, and you've got a month's break or a month where you're riding lightly, this is a good time to indulge in the strength training a little more than you might otherwise. And then even when you head into base, that might be where you start to transition more back toward a maintenance phase, simply because even our base phase is still pretty hefty.
Also,
Keegan,
so this is something you do, right? Sorry, Nate, we're probably thinking on the same pathway here. This is something you strength train year round, but you also periodize it, right?
Yeah. So I work with a strength coach, Wukar Fit out of Salt Lake. And so he's got my strength training all periodized. And generally, like, the preseason is like when I'm off the bike completely, I'll take a week off the gym, just kind of reset, and I'll start easing back into it lightweight. And then it's kind of goes with the bike programs. Like, base season is like heavy, like we're building in the gym and trying to get that like max weight up. Like, I'll do lots of like 70%, 80%, even 90% of max lifts. And then as the bike training gets like more intense, then the gym training tailors back. It doesn't necessarily back off intensity, but it changes to more like high force, I guess, or more speed. So more box jumps, like lighter weights with more but more explosive. And maybe I'm not going quite as deep in the squat or whatever, but it's like a more explosive up. So we just kind of change it that way. And then obviously on like rest weeks, we'll back the gym off a little bit, still maintaining, but just like make sure you're getting proper rest and not going too heavy. But it is a year-round program for me. And I think as long as you kind of tailor it right to go with the bike training, it should never interfere with your on the bike work. I think it should complement it. I'm sure there's some days where you're like, wow, I'm pretty clapped right now. I don't know if I can do the gym, but like, you just like, I think once you kind of get warmed up, you're always fine. And as long as like you make sure there's space between your hard days, like you wouldn't want to do a hard bike workout, hard gym workout that evening, and then like expect to have a good bike workout the next day. So I think you kind of have to plan ahead to like know how to stack those days and like look at your training week and say, oh, I'm going to do gym on my tempo day or my sweet spot day. And then I'm going to have a day off the next day or a rest day. And then I can do my really intense work on the day after that. So I think you have to kind of like plan ahead and figure out which day it's going to fit best with training. But I never miss a gym day.
Yeah, I do want to, one thing I forgot to bring up is that another reason I like to push strength training in the base phase, whether it's sweet spot or a lower and slower approach, is that base phase is a good time to make mistakes. So if you find out that you're doing too much lifting and it's bearing you in too much fatigue on top of the training you're doing on the bike, this is the time where you can figure those things out, cut back so that they don't trickle into your later phases.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just maintain 2 a week is what I do, 2 strength training sessions a week, and they last usually 30 to 40 minutes long. And it's not like I'm doing a CrossFit set where I'm like, boom, move on to the next thing, move on to the next thing. That's not the goal. I get plenty of that sort of metabolic work on the bike, right? So I don't need to then bring that over. Instead, it's about making sure that I'm doing movements properly and focusing on technique. And it's almost all body weight for me. Well, once we get our gym built and everything else in our garage, then we'll actually have, stuff to do more. But you can just do so much in terms of like the productivity for this sort of thing. And actually tying this back to Rose's question, holding the right technique on a bike is hard. Like if you watch our video that we did with Lee McCormick, where we talked about how to be a faster mountain biker, you can look that up on our YouTube channel. You can see us going like, oh, wow, that's how you have to, like, that's the position you have to hold. And just us doing that. I remember Chad, you and I were like, we're fried and we haven't even gotten on the bike yet because we were using his rip row machine. Like it's hard to hold that. And strength training from, like Keegan mentioned, Art from Woo Car Fit from Utah, which TrainerRoad user as well. Awesome guy. And hopefully going to be on the Successful Athletes podcast soon. But Art, it knows how to design strength training for cyclists. And that's just a really important thing. Like you can't just go to some person that has never understood the demands that a mountain biker or a cyclist faces and then have them build a strength training plan for you. It should be something that's complementary. So you have to seek out that sort of expertise, I think, to be able to have like a really productive training experience where you're doing strength training and marrying that with a bike. And I do my strength training and then the next day. So I do mine on Wednesdays usually. And then I have Thursday as my easy day on the bike. So then that way I don't tack it onto my Thursday and suddenly my easy day is just a hard day because I did strength training and, still a bike workout. And then I tack mine on at the end of my week, which is Saturday. And that's Saturday is when I do my last strength training session. I try to space them out too, because there have been plenty of times where I'm like, oh, I'll just do it 2 days in a row. I feel fine. And then the next day after that, or 2 days later, I really feel the fatigue. So it's important to space that out. We went into strength training way more than I thought that we would.
But people love strength training and nutrition. We just do that all day long. I want to say 2 more tips and then ask Keegan what he does. But so I have fallen in the trap of doing too much. I've probably done that like 15 times and too much strength training. And the thing that I've found, and this is based on some science that I read that's really helped me, is that I leave reps in the tank, and that's the bro science. But I used to go, especially in college, like if you're not shaking on that last one and you do like I forget, like negative sets, I forget the name of them, but where you kind of get them up and then you slowly let it go like down and you're really doing it. And I would do drop sets and I would just try to annihilate myself. And if that was the only thing that I was doing, that would probably be fine. But I find that if, let's say I'm doing bench press and my target is 15 reps, but maybe I could really do 18 if I could do 18 if I had to, but I stop at 15. And there's this effective reps kind of, I think that's the name of it, idea in bro science where, hey, those last 2 reps is where you're going to get 100% of the gains. And if you don't go to those last 2 reps, you're not going to get the gains. And that's actually not true. You get gains from not like the whole time, and you don't have to go at the end. And that just doesn't fry my nervous system as much. I recover better, and that's amazing. And my second tip, and so Keegan, I'm going to ask you about how deep you go when you're lifting. And my second tip is the hex bar. Man, I saw a TikTok on this, and it is hex bar overhead press. It sounds crazy, but it targets my shoulder so well. The range of motion is insane, and I am just loving it. And then hex bar rows too. There's something about that neutral grip and getting them outside a little bit wider that's hitting my back really well. So my current strength training program, I do full body every time. I'm doing 2 sets each time, but I do hex bar deadlifts, hex bar overhead press, hex bar row, and then bench press. So those are all kind of like pretty compound movements. I don't really need to do these accessory things. I leave a little bit in the tank, but my strength is going up. I'm looking better and all that stuff, but it's not impacting my cycling either at the moment. Yes. Sorry, Chad, you want to say something?
Okay. 3 very quick things. First off, hex bar, no lie, is a great piece of equipment. Fully agree. Secondly, the effective reps is showing itself to be some nonsense, just like Nate said. And additionally, what he was describing is reps in reserve, so RAR. So if you're interested in that, look it up. You don't have to push yourself to failure and bury yourself in fatigue in the weight training room.
Chad, how do you like my little full body routine of a row, overhead press, a bench press, and a squat?
I'm going to order a hex bar. It's a great idea.
Yeah.
He loves it. Keegan, can you give people an idea, like Nate's question there, like what is the feel that you're going for in terms of like completely blowing yourself out being one end of the spectrum and then hardly touching anything for the weights or with weights? What are you looking to feel at the end of your strength training?
And I mean, kind of goes back to like number one rule in the gym is like, don't get hurt. So we're going to start there. That's like the number one thing. Like on the bike, I'll push myself till I fall over and pass out on the pavement. That's like no problem, you know? But in the gym, I feel like we always leave quite a bit in the tank. I'm sure there's some days where like, it's really like we're doing like 80 or 90% max deadlifts. And we're really trying to like knock out those 3 reps. And like, it's hard, but I still feel like I could do a little more. I could add like 10 more pounds, or maybe I could add 1 more rep, but like, I never push to the point where like I'm shaking and I can't pick the bar up again. So I think it gets really difficult, but I think as long as you maintain good form and you like kind of realize like, okay, this is as far as I'm going to push. I'm not going to like test myself to do like, oh, I really want to deadlift 300 pounds today. It's like some days it's not going to happen. I think you have to realize that and be like, okay, I'll just do 290. It's fine. Like, it's not a big deal. It's 10 pounds. Like, you just kind of let your ego go. And sure, there's even some days where like I'll skip reps. I'll be like, okay, this is it. Like the bike workout was more taxing than I thought. So I'm only going to do 4 instead of 5 of these reps. So I think you should be really mindful in the gym. And even though I might have like 4x4 deadlifts on the plan, if it's not driving and I'm not feeling like, oh, I can knock this out of the park today, like I just don't do it. Or I'll like tone back the weight like 10 pounds. So it kind of depends. Like some days I'll like text Art and I'll be like, hey man, like feeling pretty blown out. Should I do the same weight and less reps, or should I just do less weight and same reps? And he'll tell me what to do depending on what the goal of the workout is. But I think that's like really important, is to make sure your technique is there. Or like sometimes I'll be lifting with Sophia or Ryan, like, hey, you mind watching my technique? I'm starting to get a little tired. I want to make sure I nail this. Otherwise I'm just not going to do it. So I think you have to pay a lot of attention to all that stuff and just be mindful, like, because you can easily blow your back out if you're doing, even 70, 80% deadlifts or squats, whatever. Like, that's the number one goal in the gym, is that you're meant to get stronger and make yourself more durable. You don't want to go hurting yourself.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
Do it.
If you think I have better hair than Jonathan, give it a thumbs up. If not, leave a comment.
My hair is better than his.